It's Wednesday night, and we're in a continuing study on what? It's Sunday night. Did I say Wednesday? Oh, I'm sorry. It's Sunday night. We'll continue our study on the spirits in prison. And I've found more to say about this than most people know how to even think about it, because I've defined a lot of words, and that's what you have to do to find out what things mean. And we're talking about the spirits in prison. To make it real simple, if I can, of course, I'll just read the verse 18 and 19 of 1 Peter 3. For Christ also hath once suffered for sins, not suffered many times. He also, well, if he's saying also, he's referring back to something that's already been said, and he's talking about us suffering in the previous verses is what he's doing. So if it says Christ has also suffered, he's comparing what he did with what we're supposed to be doing. In fact, he did it first, and he's telling us this is your example in order for you to mature and grow up. If you back up to verse 14, but if you suffer for righteousness' sake, well, you're going to lead down to for Christ also. So if we suffer for righteousness' sake, he's saying Christ has also in the past already suffered for sins, the just for the unjust. So he's given us an example in the previous chapter, and we realize that from when we studied the second chapter, and he's talking about in verse 21, even here to where you called, this is what you were called to as the church. Called, of course, there in verse 21 is the word kaleo, K-A-L-E-O. Now he said, this is your calling. We're not just called to go to church and sit on a pew. We have a calling. We are the ecclesia, E-K-K-L-E-S-I-A. Ecclesia, that is the word church. Somebody said this morning, talking to a Church of Christ, and they said, well, we believe that the Bible, when it says Church of Christ, it means the Church of Christ down the street, that one down there, this Church of Christ up here. I thought the church was a she, not a brick building. The church is not a building, it's ecclesia, K-A-L-E-O. Ecclesia, K-K-L-E-S-I-A. That is the word church. And it's a construction of ek, meaning out, and kaleo, meaning to call. Well, that we're called out of this world, and Paul says, or Peter says, here's your calling right here. Here it is. He says you're called to church because you're called to something, and we're called out. We're called to a calling that takes us out of the world and out of association with the world. Then he says, for even to hereunto were you called, because Christ also suffered for us. There it is again. There it is before it's said over there in verse 18. Christ also. So what he's doing, he's comparing our sufferings with Christ's sufferings and how we have to suffer. Well, what is suffering for?
Righteousness' sake.
Well, it is. But what does the suffering do when we start off here and we suffer for, well, let me say it again. It takes two different types of suffering to mature and to conform to his image. That's right. Conforming to the image of Christ, to image, that is maturing. The same thing. We're predestined. Whom he did foreknow, he also did predestinate to be conformed. To be conformed to the image, to the likeness of Jesus. When we're like Jesus, we are mature. Now that's what Peter's book is about. It's about God calling the Gentile church, which is the spirits in prison, to maturity. This whole thing, all through here, you'll notice this. We're actually studying the book of 1 Peter is what we're doing when we're studying the spirits in prison. There's so many things in here that I've got to say to you, and I've got a whole bunch tonight, and I know I'm going to have, I already see where I'm going to be going next week because I don't have time to get to it tonight. And I do this a lot. he says, now hereunto were ye called. Every time you see called, like we know that all things work together for good to them that are the called. Romans 8:28. Romans 8:28. 8:28. Well, if we are the called, and we're called to do something, and we're the ecclesia, which is the church, then that's why all things work together for good. All things for good. All things for good, that we might mature and be like Christ. And we're going to see the maturity of the spirits in prison in the next chapter. We're going to watch the spirits in prison grow up and the church become mature. Israel never did mature out of the Old Testament. The difference between Old Testament Israel and spiritual Israel, Christ lives in us, and Christ lived in that tabernacle, but he was disassociated with the individual in that he wasn't living in their hearts. Well, he was if they were elect, but they didn't have to. They had to follow. They were supposed to follow that tabernacle wherever it went, but they didn't. Most of them. Some of them did, some of them didn't. I believe the ones that didn't were not believers, even though that they were Israelites. And the difference is that they had a literal cloud and a literal fire to follow, and everything we follow is written in our hearts. They more or less, I won't say they didn't have a choice because God fixed their hearts. But they had a situation that was literal, that appeared that they could do what they wanted to do, and that's what they did because God didn't fix their hearts. When God writes his word in your heart, you will have to do what you're called to do. Because he's got a church that he says, I'm going to make you do your calling. I'm going to make you. Not only does he drag you in to salvation, no man can come to me except my Father which has sent me draw him. The word is helko. Draw is the word helko. It means to drag in. God's going to continue to drag us and make us be willing. When I say make us to be willing, I mean he will overthrow our will with years of fire and trials. And when he does that, he'll cause us not only to be willing, but to love it and to like it. When he makes you willing, if he makes you willing, within a will that he puts in your heart, there's no unhappiness in it. There may be unhappiness in the flesh at times, but there's no unhappiness in the will of God that's in your heart. He takes your will and turns it upside down, puts his will in your heart, and you like it. It takes some time to learn to like it. You don't like it all of a sudden, because when you're young in the faith, you're over here catching lots of flack. But as you get older, you really learn to like it. I really like this. I enjoy life now. I say this and people really don't believe me. I enjoy life at my age better than I've ever enjoyed it in my life. I feel like I'm just busy all the time for the Lord. I'm fighting more battles than I've ever fought in my life. But you know what? The battles that I'm winning outweigh that, and the battle that I'm winning is going to last till the end of my life, until the end of time, and it's going to win anyway, and everything else is going to seem so insignificant. A lot of afflictions which are but for a moment. You know what God called our lives? A moment. They work for us a far more and exceeding eternal weight of glory there in the 4th chapter of 2 Corinthians. They work for us they're just for a moment. Your whole life is just a moment. My life has been a moment. It's just a vapor. We're like the grass of the field, which is soon cut down. I can't believe that 70 years has gone by. I'm still little Jimmy Brown. That's what I think. That's what they used to call me in high school, little Jimmy Brown. That's who I think of. That was one of my nicknames, Charlie Brown, little Jimmy Brown. That's what they call me. And I still feel like that same person. I know there's a whole lot of experience there, but it just seems like the other day. I used to be young, and I keep wondering why y'all are looking at me and come around to me asking me questions. But I'm thinking, I'm just little Jimmy Brown. What are y'all asking me these questions for? Why am I counseling you? I'm just a kid. I still feel like that same person, just with a whole bunch of experience on it. And I can't understand why everybody's looking at me for instruction. Sometimes I just don't understand it. And that's the truth. But life is going to be over before you know it. I know kids say, oh, yes, you're an old man. I remember listening to old guys say that. Life is a moment. It's just, it passes so fast. And there it is. Zip, it's gone. And I'll be dead just another day or